She threw hot coffee straight at a woman's chest in a crowded Manhattan cafe. Everyone gasped. Everyone stared. But nobody in that room knew what was really happening. Nobody knew that the pregnant waitress standing there, trembling, 7 months along with triplets, was secretly married to the most powerful CEO in New York City. And nobody knew that in exactly 4 hours she would be lying on an operating table, bleeding out, with doctors shouting that they were losing her. Her stepmother wanted her dead. A billionaire rival wanted her destroyed, and the one man who could save her had vanished 6 months ago without a single word. But here is what makes this story different from anything you have heard before. The person who saves Elena is not who you think, and the reason her stepmother spent 20 years torturing her, the real reason, is a secret so devastating it will change everything you thought you knew about this story. I promise you, the reveal near the end is something you will not see coming. Not even close. This is a story about a woman who had every reason to give up and chose to fight instead. Value statement. Before we begin, here is what this story will remind you. The people who try the hardest to break you are almost always the ones who are most afraid of your strength. And real love does not show up when your life is perfect. It shows up when everything is falling apart and stays anyway. If you have ever felt alone, underestimated, or written off by someone who should have protected you, this story is for you. If you are ready, hit that subscribe button right now so you do not miss what happens next. Drop a heart in the comments if you believe that kindness is stronger than cruelty. And if you know someone who needs to hear that it gets better, share this story with them. Sometimes one story at the right moment can change everything. Now let us dive in.
She hurled the coffee because she had nothing left to lose. She didn't know that in exactly 4 hours she would be on a deathbed delivering triplets she never planned for a man the entire city feared. And when he walked through that hospital door, every person in the room stopped breathing because no one knew he was her husband. And what he did next made the whole world cry. Welcome back to Beyond Color Stories, where love conquers pain and hearts that were once broken find their forever home. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments where you're listening from today. And stay until the very end, because the twist near the final chapter is something nobody sees coming. Hit that subscribe button, give this story a thumbs up, and let's go. Elena Mitchell had been standing for 6 hours straight. Her ankles were swollen, her lower back screamed with every step. At 7 months pregnant with triplets, she had no business carrying a tray of lattes across a crowded Manhattan cafe. But rent was due on Friday, and the babies didn't care about her exhaustion. They kicked and shifted inside her like they were already fighting for space in a world that hadn't made room for them yet. Whitfield's Cafe sat on the corner of Lexington and 53rd, the kind of upscale coffee shop where a single espresso cost more than Elena made in an hour. The morning rush had settled into a comfortable hum of clinking cups, low conversations, and the steady hiss of the espresso machine. Elena moved between tables with practiced grace, her smile automatic, her feet aching, her mind counting the hours until her shift ended. Her best friend, Rachel Taylor, worked the espresso bar 3 feet away. Her dark blonde hair pulled into a messy bun, her apron dusted with cocoa powder. Rachel glanced at Elena and shook her head. "Girl, you look like you swallowed a beach ball." "3 beach balls. Sit down before you pop." Elena balanced the tray on one hip and managed a tired grin. "If I sit down, I am not getting back up, and rent does not pay itself." Rachel pointed the steam wand at her like a weapon. "You know what else is due? Those babies, like soon due, as in any day now due, as in why are you still standing due?" Elena opened her mouth to respond, but the words died in her throat. The front door of the cafe had just opened, and the woman who walked in carried an atmosphere with her like a weather system, cold, precise, and impossible to ignore. Vivian Marshall was 52 years old and looked exactly like a woman who spent $3,000 a month on maintenance. Her blonde hair was blown out to perfection. Her designer handbag probably cost more than Elena's rent for the entire year. Her heels clicked against the tile floor like a metronome, counting down to something unpleasant. She scanned the room with ice blue eyes until they landed on Elena. The cafe got quieter. Not silent, but the kind of quiet that happens when people sense something about to go wrong. The regulars knew Vivian. They had seen her come in before. They had seen what happened after. Vivian walked directly to Elena, ignoring every other person in the room as if they were furniture, and stopped close enough that Elena could smell her perfume. Something expensive and sharp, like roses dipped in acid. "Still here?" Vivian said, loud enough for the nearest 6 tables to hear. "I thought pregnant women were supposed to rest, but I suppose that requires someone who actually cares about you." "And who would that be, Elena?" "Certainly not the father. Where is he, by the way?" "Oh, that is right. He left." Elena's fingers tightened on the tray. She had practiced this. Therapists called it gray rocking. You don't react. You don't engage. You become boring. You become stone. She tried to step around Vivian. Vivian moved into her path. "Your mother was nothing," Vivian continued, her voice carrying across the cafe with surgical precision. "A nobody who died and left me to clean up her mess. And look at you, pregnant, alone. Waiting tables at 27 years old. You are her exact copy, Elena. A beautiful disaster going absolutely nowhere." The cafe was truly silent now. Rachel's hand had frozen on the espresso machine. A man at a nearby table lowered his newspaper. A woman by the window stopped mid-bite on her croissant. Elena stood perfectly still. She could take the insults about herself. She had been absorbing them for 20 years, ever since Vivian married her father, when Elena was 7. Ever since her mother's funeral, when Vivian had looked at her with barely concealed irritation, as if Elena were an inconvenient stain on her new life. She could take being called worthless. She could take being called a mistake. She had heard those words so many times they had almost lost their sting. Almost. But her mother. Her mother, who had read to her every night. Her mother, who had braided her hair and kissed her forehead and told her that kindness was the strongest thing a person could be. Her mother, who had died of cancer when Elena was 7 and left a hole in her life that 20 years of Vivian's cruelty had only made deeper. That was the line. Elena's hand closed around the ceramic mug on her tray. The coffee inside was fresh. She could feel the heat radiating through the cup, almost burning her palm. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a quiet voice said, "Don't." But a louder voice, one that sounded exactly like her mother, said enough. Elena threw the coffee. It arced across the short distance between them and hit Vivian square on the chest. The splash was spectacular. Dark liquid cascading down Vivian's cream-colored blouse, spreading in a pattern that looked almost artistic, like a painting of the moment everything changed. Vivian screamed, not from pain, though the coffee was hot enough to sting. She screamed from the sheer audacity of it, from the public humiliation, from the fact that the girl she had spent 20 years crushing had finally fought back. The cafe erupted. Gasps. Whispers. 2 people pulled out their phones. Rachel, from behind the counter, muttered just loud enough to be heard. Honestly, that blouse was ugly anyway. Vivian's face twisted into something Elena had never seen before. Pure, uncontrolled rage. She raised her hand, palm open, aimed directly at Elena's face. And the front door of the cafe slammed open so hard it bounced against the wall. Every head in the cafe turned toward the door. The man standing there looked like he had been carved from authority itself. Doll. Over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a jaw that could have been cut from granite. His suit was dark and perfectly tailored. His eyes were steel gray, and they were locked on Vivian's raised hand with an intensity that made three people at nearby tables instinctively push their chairs back. This was Chris Jordan. In Manhattan, there were powerful men, and then there was Chris Jordan. At 34, he ran Jordan Capital Group, one of the most feared private equity firms on the East Coast. Magazines called him a genius. Competitors called him a predator. His employees called him Sir and meant it. He had the kind of presence that didn't ask for attention. It demanded it. Rooms went quiet when he entered. People straightened their posture. Conversations paused. He crossed the cafe in 4 strides. Not running, not rushing, just the controlled, deliberate movement of a man who was used to the world adjusting itself around him rather than the other way around. He caught Vivian's wrist before her palm could connect with Elena's face. His grip was firm, not theatrical, not violent, just absolute. The kind of grip that communicated very clearly that the hand he was holding would not be moving again until he decided to release it. Vivian gasped. She tried to pull away, and couldn't. Chris did not look at her. Not yet. His eyes went to Elena first, scanning her face, her body, the swell of her pregnant belly, checking for damage, for injury, for signs that he had arrived too late. Something flickered behind his steel gray eyes. Relief, fear, tenderness, and a fury so cold it could freeze the air around him. Then he turned to Vivian. "Touch her," he said, his voice low and even, carrying easily across the silent cafe. "And I will dismantle every piece of your life, starting with the house on Birch Lane that you think is yours." The color drained from Vivian's face so quickly, it was almost medically concerning. Birch Lane. That was the house Elena's father had left when he died. The house Vivian had inherited. The house that was supposed to be Elena's. How did this man know about Birch Lane? "Who are you?" Vivian stammered, her confidence cracking like cheap porcelain. Chris released her wrist and turned to Elena. The shift was remarkable. The cold, lethal energy that had been directed at Vivian disappeared in an instant, replaced by something entirely different. His hand rose slowly, gently, and brushed a strand of hair from Elena's face. The gesture was so tender, so intimate, that every person watching felt like they were intruding on something private. "I am sorry I'm late," Chris said, quietly. His voice was meant only for her, but in the silence of the cafe, everyone heard it. Elena stared at him. Her hands were trembling. Her heart hammered against her ribs. 6 months. He had been gone for 6 months. No calls, no messages, no explanations. She had gone from confused to worried to heartbroken to furious to numb, cycling through every stage of abandonment until she had finally accepted, with a grief that felt like drowning, that the man she had secretly married was gone forever, and now he was here, standing between her and the woman who had tormented her entire life, looking at her like she was the only person in the room. "You left me," Elena whispered. Her voice cracked on the second word. Something shifted in Chris's expression. Pain. Genuine, undisguised pain. Not the performative kind. The real kind. The kind that comes from knowing you hurt someone you would die to protect. "I never left you," he said. "I will explain everything. But right now, I need you to trust me." "Can you do that?" Before Elena could answer, Vivian found her voice again. It came out strangled, thin, nothing like her usual commanding tone. "Who is this man to you?" Chris turned back to Vivian. His expression returned to stone. "I am her husband." The cafe exploded. Not literally, of course. But the effect was similar. Whispers erupted at every table. Rachel dropped an espresso cup, and it shattered on the floor, and she did not even look down. 2 customers began filming. A barista in the back said something unrepeatable. Vivian's mouth opened and closed 3 times without producing a sound. She looked like a computer that had encountered an error message it could not process. Her stepdaughter, the waitress, the pregnant, abandoned, worthless girl she had been publicly humiliating for 20 years, married, to a man who radiated more money and power than anyone Vivian had ever encountered. That is impossible, Vivian finally managed. Chris's expression did not change. Call your lawyer. You will need one. He turned back to Elena, dismissing Vivian as completely and efficiently as one closes a browser tab. His hand found Elena's, and his fingers intertwined with hers with a familiarity that spoke of hundreds of nights spent together, of whispered conversations and shared laughter, and a love that had been real and deep long before this moment. But Elena's eyes were glazing over. The adrenaline from the confrontation, the shock of seeing Chris, the physical strain of standing for 6 hours at 7 months pregnant with triplets. It was all converging at once, crashing together like waves in a storm, and her body was giving out. A wave of dizziness hit her so hard she swayed. Then she felt it. A sudden warmth between her legs, a wetness that should not have been there, a sharp cramping pain that radiated through her abdomen like lightning. Her water had broken. At 30 weeks, way too early. Rachel saw it first. She vaulted over the counter with an athleticism that would have been impressive in any context and grabbed Elena's arm. She is bleeding, Rachel screamed. Someone call 911. Chris caught Elena before she hit the floor. He scooped her up in one motion, cradling her against his chest, her head resting against his shoulder. In this moment, he was not a billionaire CEO. He was not the most powerful man in any room. He was a terrified husband holding his pregnant wife, and his hands were shaking. Elena, he said, Elena, look at me. Stay with me. Elena's eyes fluttered. Her voice was barely a breath. The babies, Chris. The babies. Chris turned to the door. A man in a dark suit materialized beside him as if he had been waiting for exactly this moment, which in fact he had. This was Michael Webb, Chris's head of security. Former Marine, built like a refrigerator with a military haircut. He had been stationed outside the cafe since 6 that morning because he had been stationed near Elena every morning for the past 6 months on Chris's direct orders. Get the car, Chris commanded. Now. Mount Sinai. 8 minutes. Clear the route. Michael moved like a machine. In 90 seconds, Elena was in the back seat of an armored black SUV, Chris holding her, one hand pressing against her belly as if he could physically keep the baby safe through sheer willpower. Rachel climbed into the front passenger seat without being invited or particularly welcome. Michael glanced at her. Ma'am, this is a secured vehicle. Rachel buckled her seatbelt. I am coming. Do not argue. I will fight you. Michael evaluated her for approximately 1 second. Ma'am, I was Special Forces. Rachel pointed at the road. And I am from New Jersey. Drive. Michael drove. The emergency room at Mount Sinai was controlled chaos. Elena was transferred from the SUV to a gurney in under a minute, Chris running alongside, his hand never leaving hers. Nurses in blue scrubs materialized from every direction, attaching monitors, calling out vital signs, moving with the practiced urgency of people who understand that seconds can mean the difference between life and death. Dr. Catherine Shaw met them at the entrance to the obstetrics wing. She was 45, with short silver hair and glasses that she peered over rather than through, giving her the appearance of someone who was permanently evaluating whether you were wasting her time. She was one of the top high-risk obstetricians in New York, and she had been monitoring Elena's pregnancy remotely for months, another arrangement Chris had made in secret. How far along? She asked, already examining Elena as the gurney moved. 30 weeks, Chris said. Triplets. She collapsed from stress. There is bleeding. Dr. Shaw's fingers moved across Elena's abdomen with expert precision. She checked the monitor readings. She listened. And then she looked up at Chris with an expression that he, a man who could read people the way most people read menus, immediately understood. His blood went cold. "Mr. Jordan," Dr. Shaw said, her voice calm, but weighted, "your wife has placental abruption. 2 of the 3 placentas are separating from the uterine wall. This means the babies are losing oxygen. We need to deliver via emergency cesarean section immediately. If we wait, we risk losing all 3 babies." She paused. "And possibly Elena. Here is something most people do not know, and it is important enough to pause the story for just a moment. Placental abruption is a serious pregnancy complication that affects roughly 1 in 100 pregnancies. It can be triggered by many things, but severe emotional stress is a significant risk factor. If you or someone you love is pregnant and experiences sudden abdominal pain, bleeding, or contractions that feel wrong, especially after a stressful event, do not wait. Do not drive yourself to the hospital. Call 911 immediately. Minutes matter. Knowing the signs can genuinely save lives." Elena, who had been drifting in and out of consciousness, suddenly gripped Chris's hand with a strength that surprised both of them. "Promise me," she said. Her eyes were wide, glassy with pain and fear. "If it comes down to a choice, save them. Not me." Chris's jaw tightened. His eyes burned. "No. Chris, please, that is not a choice I will ever make, Elena. You fight." "That is not a request." Elena was wheeled through double doors into the operating room. A nurse gently but firmly stopped Chris at the threshold. "Family waits here, sir." Chris stared at the nurse. He stared at the doors. He stared at the space where Elena had just been. And for the first time in his adult life, he stood in a room where his money, his power, his reputation, and his iron will meant absolutely nothing. He could not buy his way past this door. He could not intimidate a scalpel. He could not outmaneuver biology. He was just a man whose wife was dying 20 feet away, and there was nothing he could do but wait. Chris pressed his palms flat against the corridor wall and leaned his forehead against his hands. His breathing was ragged. His shoulders, which always carried the posture of a man in command, trembled. Michael stood 6 feet away, silent, watching. He had served 3 combat tours and seen things that would haunt most people for life, but he had never seen Chris Jordan afraid, until now. "If I lose her," Chris said. The sentence had no ending. It did not need one. "You will not," Michael said. "She is tougher than both of us. And I say that with no disrespect to either of us." In the waiting room, Rachel sat in a plastic chair that was clearly designed by someone who had never actually sat in a chair. She held her phone in both hands, texting updates to no one, because Elena had no one. No family, no parents, no siblings, just Rachel and the babies and the man in the hallway who was falling apart with the quiet intensity of a building collapsing from the inside. 30 minutes passed, an hour, the longest hour of Chris Jordan's life. Then Dr. Shaw emerged through the double doors, pulling off surgical gloves. Chris straightened immediately. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. "The first 2 babies are delivered," Dr. Shaw said. "Both boys. They are premature and small, but they are breathing on their own. They have been moved to the neonatal intensive care unit." Chris exhaled, his hands unclenched. "And the third?" Dr. Shaw's expression shifted. The subtle change that only Chris would notice because he had spent his career reading the micro-expressions of people across negotiating tables. "The third baby is a girl. Her heart rate dropped significantly during delivery. She is alive, but she is in critical condition. The next 48 hours will determine whether she stabilizes." Chris nodded. Each nod was mechanical, like a man processing information while actively trying not to fall apart. And Elena? Dr. Shaw met his eyes directly. She is hemorrhaging, Mr. Jordan. We are working to stabilize her. She lost a significant amount of blood during the delivery. I need you to understand that the situation is serious. How serious? I need you to prepare yourself. The words hung in the air between them like a blade suspended on a thread. Chris walked to the nearest chair and sat down. He placed his hands flat on his knees. He stared at the floor. And then, quietly, without dramatic gesture or theatrical collapse, the most powerful man in New York City put his face in his hands and wept. Rachel reached over and placed her hand on his shoulder. She did not say anything. There was nothing to say. Vivian Marshall had not gone home after the cafe. She had gone to her lawyer's office, a cramped, slightly dingy space on the 14th floor of a building that should have been condemned, occupied by a man named Gerald Price, who charged $300 an hour despite the stained carpet and the smell of old tuna sandwiches. Gerald Price was not a good lawyer. He was an available one, the kind of attorney who asked few questions and followed instructions for a premium, which suited Vivian perfectly because the instructions she was about to give were not the kind that good lawyers would accept. Vivian sat across from Gerald's cluttered desk, her coffee-stained blouse still damp, her composure rebuilt with the structural integrity of wet cardboard. She spoke quickly and precisely. She is at Mount Sinai. She is in surgery. If she dies, the trust fund Rebecca left defaults to Elena's next of kin. As her legal stepmother, that is me, but if those babies survive, everything goes to them, and to that husband. Gerald leaned back in his chair. His pen tapped against a yellow legal pad. What trust fund are we talking about? This is where the story requires a piece of history that changes everything. Elena's mother, Rebecca Mitchell, had been a patent lawyer before she got sick. A brilliant one. Before she died, she had quietly established a trust fund for Elena worth $4.2 million. The trust had two activation conditions. It would unlock when Elena turned 28 or when Elena got married, whichever came first. Vivian had known about this trust since the day she married Elena's father. In fact, the trust was the reason she married him, not the man, the money. And when Elena's father died of a heart attack 5 years later, Vivian had inherited the house, the savings, and the role of legal guardian to a 12-year-old girl who was standing between her and $4.2 million. For 16 years, Vivian had systematically sabotaged every aspect of Elena's life. She had isolated her from friends. She had told her she was worthless so many times that Elena had started to believe it. She had interfered with relationships, discouraged ambition, and done everything in her power to ensure that Elena would never get married and never be stable enough to access that trust when she turned 28. It had almost worked. But Elena had met Chris Jordan at a charity gala 8 months ago, and everything Vivian had built began to crumble. Now, sitting in Gerald Price's office, with coffee drying on her blouse, Vivian was desperate. I need those babies declared legally incompetent, she said. I need emergency guardianship, and I need it filed before that husband of hers gets a lawyer to the courthouse. Gerald raised an eyebrow. That is aggressive, even for you. Vivian leaned forward. She is unconscious. She might not wake up, and he abandoned her for 6 months. No contact, no support. On paper, he is an absent father, and she is an incapacitated mother. We file now. We win. Gerald considered this. Then he picked up his pen and started writing. Back at the hospital, 3 hours after the surgery, Dr. Shaw emerged once more. She is stable, she told Chris. We stopped the hemorrhaging. She is unconscious, but her vitals are improving. Chris closed his eyes. His chest expanded with the deepest breath he had taken in hours. "And your daughter?" Dr. Shaw continued. "She is responding to initial treatment. All 3 babies are in the NICU. They are fragile, but they are improving." Chris nodded slowly. The relief that washed through him was so overwhelming it was almost painful, like blood returning to a limb that had gone numb. "Thank you," he said. His voice was hoarse from hours of tension and tears. He walked into Elena's room. She lay beneath white sheets, connected to monitors and IV lines, her face pale but peaceful. The machines beeped in steady rhythm. Her chest rose and fell. Chris pulled a chair to her bedside. He took her hand. He leaned close enough that his lips brushed her hair. "You did it," he whispered. "You are safe now. We are all safe." He closed his eyes and allowed himself, for the first time since the cafe, to believe it. He fell asleep holding her hand. At 3 in the morning, his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a message from Michael Webb. 4 words that erased every ounce of relief he had accumulated. "Boss. We have a problem. Someone filed an emergency guardianship petition for the babies. Hearing is at 9 a.m. The petitioner is Vivian Marshall." Chris stared at the phone. The silence in the room was absolute. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Elena slept peacefully, and Chris Jordan sat in the blue glow of his phone screen, feeling the ground shift beneath him for the second time in 12 hours. "She is trying to take my children," he said softly to no one. His hand tightened around Elena's. He did not sleep again. 9 in the morning, Manhattan Family Court. Chris had slept for approximately 90 minutes in the past 36 hours. He did not look like it. He looked like a man who had been carved from cold marble and dressed in a $12,000 suit. His jaw was set. His eyes were clear and calculating. Whatever vulnerability he had shown in the hospital corridor was now buried beneath layers of controlled fury and strategic precision. He arrived at the courthouse, flanked by 3 attorneys from Hartwell and Associates, TSM, one of the top family law firms in the city. They had been assembled in 4 hours, which was a testament to both Chris's resources and the amount of money he was paying them. Vivian was already seated at the opposing table, Gerald Price beside her. She had changed clothes, fixed her makeup, and adopted an expression of practiced maternal concern that made Chris's stomach turn. The judge was the Honorable Patricia Whitmore, 62, known for being thorough, fair, and deeply unimpressed by wealth. Chris's lawyers had briefed him on this. Money would not win this room. Evidence would. Gerald Price stood first. "Your Honor, my client, Vivian Marshall, has been the primary caregiver of Elena Mitchell since she was 7 years old." Mrs. Marshall raised Elena after the tragic death of her mother. "She is here today because she is deeply concerned about the welfare of her grandchildren." "They are not her grandchildren," Chris said from his seat. The judge looked at him. "Mr. Jordan, you will have your opportunity to speak." Gerald continued. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Jordan abandoned his pregnant wife for 6 months without any contact or financial support. He disappeared entirely, leaving Elena alone, financially struggling, and medically vulnerable. We are requesting temporary emergency guardianship to ensure these children are protected while the court evaluates the fitness of both parents." The courtroom murmured. Chris's lead attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Patricia Collins, stood to respond. But the judge held up her hand. "I want to hear from Mr. Jordan directly." Chris stood. He buttoned his jacket, a gesture so automatic it was almost unconscious, and walked to the front of the room. "6 months ago," he began, his voice steady and measured, "I received a credible death threat, not against me, against my wife. A business rival named David Ashford made it explicitly clear that anyone close to me would be targeted. I consulted with federal law enforcement and was advised to eliminate any visible connection to Elena in order to protect her. He paused. I made the hardest decision of my life. I cut contact entirely, but I did not abandon her. My head of security, Michael Webb, was assigned to monitor her safety every single day. I have 6 months of daily surveillance reports, security assessments, and financial records showing that every one of Elena's medical bills, rent payments, and living expenses was covered through an anonymous trust. I also have documented correspondence with the FBI confirming the nature of the threat and the protective measures I implemented. He looked directly at Vivian. I did not abandon my wife, Your Honor. I was trying to save her life, and I will spend the rest of mine making up for the pain that decision caused her. Gerald Price recovered quickly. He presented bank records showing Vivian as Elena's long-term guardian. Character witnesses, neighbors who described Vivian as a caring, involved parent. The portrait he painted was careful and calculated, and if you did not know Vivian Marshall personally, you might almost believe it. The judge listened to both sides. She removed her glasses, cleaned them, and put them back on. I am ordering a 72-hour continuance, she said. Child Protective Services will conduct home evaluations of both parties. The children will remain in hospital care under medical supervision until this court reconvenes. Court adjourned. Chris walked out of the courtroom and made 3 phone calls in rapid succession. His legal team would spend the next 72 hours compiling the most comprehensive custody filing the Manhattan family court system had ever seen. He believed he had control of the situation. He believed that with enough evidence, enough resources, enough legal firepower, he could bury Vivian's case so completely it would never resurface. He was wrong. That evening, Elena woke up. Her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the fluorescent hospital lights. She saw Chris first. He was sitting beside her bed, still in his suit, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who had aged 5 years in 2 days. "Chris," she said. Her voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. "The babies." Chris took her hand. "They are alive, Elena. All 3. 2 boys and a girl. They are in the NICU. They are small, but they are fighters." Elena's face crumpled with relief. Tears streamed down her temples and into her hair. She pressed Chris's hand against her cheek. Then her expression changed. "I heard voices," she said slowly. "While I was under. I heard Vivian." Chris's jaw tightened. "What did she do?" Elena asked. He told her. Carefully, directly, honestly, the guardianship petition, the hearing, the 72-hour window. Elena listened. She watched Chris's face as he spoke. And when he finished, something shifted behind her eyes, something hard and bright and entirely new. "She is not taking my children," Elena said. This was the moment. Not the coffee throw, not Chris's arrival. This. This was the moment Elena Mitchell stopped being a victim and started being a force. She pushed herself upright despite the pain. She asked to see the legal filings. She asked Chris to call his lawyers. She asked Rachel to bring her laptop. Rachel, who had been sleeping in a chair in the corner and looked roughly like a raccoon that had been through a car wash, blinked awake. "Babe, you literally just came back from the dead. And now I have 3 reasons to stay alive and fight," Elena said. "Laptop. Now." While Chris and Elena were building their defense, a meeting was taking place in an underground parking garage on the west side of Manhattan. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete. A black Mercedes sat in the far corner, engine off, windows tinted. A man leaned against the hood, checking his watch with the impatience of someone who valued his time at roughly $4,000 per minute. David Ashford was 50 years old, silver-haired, and expensively maintained. He had the kind of face that looked trustworthy on magazine covers, the kind of smile that made investors feel safe, and the kind of mind that had built a $3 billion company on a foundation of stolen intellectual property and strategic betrayal. 2 years earlier, he had been Chris Jordan's business partner. They had built a joint venture together. And then, in a single coordinated weekend, Ashford had transferred $80 million in shared assets to offshore accounts, dissolved the partnership through a legal loophole, and walked away clean. The business world had called it a disagreement. Chris called it theft. And he had spent 2 years quietly, methodically, building a case to destroy Ashford in return. But Ashford had moved first. The death threats against Elena had come from him. He had calculated, correctly, that threatening Chris's personal life would distract him from the corporate battle. What he had not calculated was that Chris would go silent for 6 months, regroup, and come back with his family intact and his focus sharpened to a lethal point. Now Ashford needed a new strategy, and Vivian Marshall had just provided one. "Mrs. Marshall," Ashford said as Vivian emerged from a taxi and walked across the parking garage, her heels echoing in the empty space. "I believe we share a common interest." Vivian regarded him with suspicion. "Who are you? Someone who wants Chris Jordan destroyed as much as you want those children? Perhaps more." Vivian crossed her arms. "What do you want?" Ashford smiled. It was the kind of smile that a shark might produce if sharks could smile. Elena's mother, Rebecca Mitchell, did not just leave a trust fund, he said. She left documents. Before she died, she was a patent lawyer. A very good one. She had assembled evidence proving that my father built Ashford Industries on stolen technology. Specifically, technology that belonged to 3 small companies, including the company run by Chris Jordan's father. He paused to let that sink in. "Those documents are locked inside Rebecca's trust," he continued, "the same trust that activates when Elena turns 28 or gets married. You have been blocking that trust for 20 years. I need you to stop blocking it." Vivian frowned. "Why would I do that?" "Because if those documents become public, Chris Jordan has the evidence to destroy my company. But if I get to them first, I can make them disappear. And in return, I will ensure you get full guardianship of those children and access to every penny in that trust." The parking garage was silent except for the distant hum of ventilation. Vivian studied Ashford's face. She was a manipulator herself. She could recognize one, but she was also desperate. "What exactly do you need me to do?" she asked. Ashford straightened his cuffs. "Just keep doing what you do best. Make Elena's life impossible. Keep her distracted. Keep her husband fighting fires on multiple fronts. And when the moment is right, I will handle the rest." On the 3rd day after surgery, Elena Mitchell sat up in her hospital bed with her laptop open, 3 legal documents spread across her blankets, and a determination in her eyes that made the nurses slightly nervous. Rachel sat in the visitor's chair, eating strawberry yogurt and providing commentary. "Okay, so I found your mom's old lawyer," Rachel said, scrolling through her phone. "His name is James Whitfield. He retired in 2019, but he still lives in Westport, Connecticut. Want me to call him?" "Call him," Elena said, without looking up. While Rachel dialed, Elena reviewed the guardianship filings. She had been studying legal documents for 2 days straight, and while she was not a lawyer, she was a fast learner with a personal stake that made her attention to detail almost frightening. She had already found 3 inconsistencies in Vivian's financial declarations. Chris walked in carrying 2 coffees. He stopped when he saw the spread of papers. "You should be resting," he said. Elena looked up at him. "I will rest when our children are legally, permanently, irrevocably ours." "Coffee?" Chris almost smiled. He handed her a cup. That afternoon, Vivian made her move. She appeared at the hospital, flowers in hand, wearing her most maternal expression, attempting to breach the fortress Chris had erected around Elena's room. Chris blocked the door. His body filled the frame completely. Vivian gave him her most disarming smile. Chris, I just wanted to see how Elena is doing. I brought lilies. Chris did not move. Forgiveness is her choice. Visiting hours are not. Leave. Vivian's smile faltered. She shifted the flowers to her other hand. The lilies trembled. But then Elena's voice came from inside the room. Let her in, Chris. Chris turned. Elena was sitting up, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She nodded. Chris stepped aside reluctantly, positioning himself against the wall with the energy of a guard dog that had been told to sit but was very much still ready to bite. Vivian entered. She placed the flowers on the bedside table. She arranged her face into concern. Elena, darling, how are you feeling? I have been so worried. Elena studied her stepmother for a long, silent moment. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then painful, then almost unbearable. Then Elena spoke. Sit down, Vivian. Vivian sat. The command in Elena's voice was new, and it unsettled her. I know about the trust fund, Elena said. I know about the $4.2 million that Mom left me. I know you have spent 20 years making sure I would never get married, never be stable enough to claim it. I know you married my father for money, and I know you kept me as your personal punching bag because you were terrified that one day I would find out the truth. Vivian's composure shattered. Not slowly, not gracefully. It cracked like ice under a hammer. That is not, she began. I am not finished, Elena said. Here is what you do not know. I turned 28 3 weeks ago, and I have been married for 8 months. That trust activated automatically. It is already mine. Your lawyer has not told you yet, but that is because he has been too busy spending your money on a boat. Vivian blinked. What? Gerald Price? Your lawyer. He has been embezzling from your accounts for the last 3 years. 18,000 here, 25,000 there. Nothing big enough to notice if you were not looking. But I was looking, Vivian. For the first time in my life, I was looking. The room was silent. Chris stood against the wall, watching his wife dismantle the woman who had tormented her for 20 years, and he felt something that went beyond love and into the territory of awe. Rachel, in the corner, paused with a spoonful of yogurt halfway to her mouth and whispered to no one in particular. That was ice cold. I love her. Vivian stood up. Her hands were shaking. Her eyes were wet. She looked like a building that had just had its foundation removed and was waiting to collapse. You are lying, she said, but her voice had no conviction. Check your bank accounts, Elena replied calmly. Then check your lawyer's new boat. Vivian left without the flowers. There is something important about hope that most stories do not tell you. Hope is not the opposite of fear. Hope is what makes fear truly devastating, because you cannot be crushed by losing something you never believed you had. It is only when you allow yourself to believe that things might be okay that the fall becomes catastrophic. Elena and Chris had allowed themselves to hope, and the universe responded with 3 disasters in 48 hours. The first disaster arrived at 2 in the morning. Elena was asleep. Chris was dozing in the chair beside her bed when Dr. Shaw entered the room with an expression that jolted him awake faster than any alarm. Mr. Jordan, she said, it is Grace. Grace, their daughter, the smallest of the triplets, the one who had fought hardest to survive the delivery. She has developed a severe infection, Dr. Shaw explained. Necrotizing enterocolitis. It is a serious intestinal condition that affects premature infants. She needs emergency surgery. Chris's hands went cold. What are the odds? Dr. Shaw did not sugarcoat it. 60% survival with surgery. Without surgery, significantly less. Elena woke during the conversation. She heard enough. Her face went white, and she reached for Chris's hand with a grip that could have been bent steel. "Do the surgery," Elena said. "Whatever it takes, whatever it costs. Save my daughter." Dr. Shaw nodded. She left to prep the surgical team. Elena and Chris sat in the dark hospital room, holding hands, listening to the monitors beep, and praying in their own separate ways for the life of a baby girl who weighed less than 3 pounds and had already survived more than most people face in a lifetime. The second disaster arrived 12 hours later on a television screen. Elena was eating lunch, or trying to, when Rachel burst into the room holding her phone with an expression that combined fury and panic in equal measure. "Do not turn on the TV," Rachel said, which of course meant Elena immediately turned on the TV, the screen filled with a news anchor's practiced concern. "Breaking news this afternoon. Newly surfaced video appears to show billionaire CEO Chris Jordan in an intimate encounter with an unidentified woman during his 6-month absence from his pregnant wife." The video played. It was grainy but clear enough. A man who looked like Chris, a woman in a hotel lobby, a hand on her waist, an embrace that lasted too long. Elena's fork clattered against the tray. Chris walked in 30 seconds later and immediately understood what had happened by the expression on Elena's face. "It is not real," he said immediately. "Ashford fabricated it. It is a deep fake." Elena stared at the screen. Then she stared at Chris. Her eyes were not angry. They were something worse. They were exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes from wanting desperately to trust someone and being given reason after reason to doubt. "You disappeared for 6 months, Chris," she said. 6 months. No calls, no letters, not even a message through Michael. "You left me pregnant and alone, and I had to figure out every single day how to survive without you. And now there is a video. Elena, I need you to leave the room," she said. "I need to think." Chris stood very still. The most powerful man in the city, reduced to silence by 6 quiet words from the woman he loved. He left the room. Rachel watched him go, then turned to Elena. "For what it is worth, I believe him. That video looks about as real as my dating profile." Elena did not laugh. She stared at the blank space where Chris had been standing and tried to separate what she knew from what she feared, which is one of the hardest things a human being can ever do. The third disaster was the worst of all. It arrived in the form of a woman with a clipboard and a badge from Child Protective Services, accompanied by a police officer. Vivian, cornered, desperate, and stripped of every weapon except malice, had filed an anonymous report claiming Elena had been using controlled substances during her pregnancy. The report included fabricated medical records that Gerald Price had obtained through a contact at a private clinic. The CPS investigator was professional and sympathetic. "I am sorry, Mrs. Jordan. We are required to follow up on every report. Until we can verify the claim is unfounded, we need to restrict your unsupervised access to the neonatal unit." Elena stood in the hallway outside the NICU, separated from her babies by a glass wall and a bureaucratic order. She could see them. The 2 boys, James and Thomas, sleeping peacefully in their incubators. And Grace's empty spot, because Grace was still in surgery, fighting for her life somewhere deeper in the hospital. Elena could not touch them, could not hold them, could not whisper to them that their mother was right here, that she would never leave, that everything would be okay. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold hospital floor. Rachel sat beside her. "She took everything," Elena said. Her voice was small and broken in a way it had not been since she was 7 years old, standing at her mother's funeral. My mother, my childhood, my money, my dignity, and now my babies. She is taking my babies, Rachel. Rachel put her arm around Elena's shoulders and held her while she cried. Then Rachel spoke, and her voice was fierce in a way that Elena had never heard before. No, she is not, because you are Elena Mitchell Jordan, and I have watched you survive things that would have ended anyone else. You survived Vivian for 20 years. You survived being alone and pregnant. You survived dying on an operating table. So you cry tonight. You cry as long as you need to. And tomorrow, we destroy that woman's case, legally, with receipts, and with the fury of a mother who has been separated from her children. Elena wiped her eyes. She looked at Rachel. Tomorrow, she repeated. Tomorrow, Rachel confirmed. The emergency hearing was convened 3 days later. Elena arrived in a wheelchair pushed by Chris, who walked beside her with the contained energy of a man who had spent 72 hours assembling the most devastating legal case of his life. He had not slept more than 6 hours total. He had consumed enough coffee to power a small city, and he had the look in his eyes that his business rivals knew meant someone's world was about to end. But the real weapon in the room was not Chris. It was Elena. She wore a simple blue dress. Her hair was pulled back. She was thin, pale, and visibly recovering from major surgery. And she radiated a quiet, unmistakable power that made every person in the courtroom pay attention. Judge Whitmore opened the session. I understand there are new filings from both parties. Counselor, proceed. Chris's attorney stood. Your Honor, we are presenting evidence in 3 categories. First, documentation proving the CPS report filed against Elena Jordan was fabricated, including forensic analysis of the medical records used in the complaint and sworn statements from Elena's physicians confirming she has never used any controlled substances. Second, financial records proving that Vivian Marshall's attorney, Gerald Price, has been embezzling from his own client. Third, classified security documents from the FBI confirming that the death threats against Elena Jordan were issued by David Ashford and that Chris Jordan's 6-month absence was a protective measure coordinated with federal law enforcement. The judge reviewed the documents. Gerald Price shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Vivian stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. But Gerald had one more card to play. Your Honor, he said, standing with a confidence that was approximately 90% manufactured. We have obtained independent DNA analysis of the 3 Jordan children. The results indicate that Chris Jordan is not the biological father. The courtroom erupted. Whispers, gasps. A reporter in the gallery began typing furiously. Chris went very still. Elena's hand tightened on the arm of her wheelchair. But she did not gasp. She did not cry. She did not look at Chris with panic or at Vivian with hatred. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, Elena said. Her voice was calm and clear. May I respond? Judge Whitmore studied her for a moment, then nodded. Go ahead, Mrs. Jordan. Elena straightened in her wheelchair. 3 days ago, I requested an independent DNA test through Dr. Catherine Shaw at Mount Sinai Hospital. I did this because I knew, based on Vivian's pattern of behavior, that she would attempt to challenge paternity. The test was conducted by the hospital's genetics laboratory, sealed, verified, and logged in the hospital's official records. I would like those results entered into evidence. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the ventilation system humming. The sealed envelope was opened. The results were read aloud. 100% paternity match. All 3 children. Chris Jordan is the biological father. Elena looked directly at Gerald Price. Your client submitted fabricated DNA results to a family court, she said. I believe that constitutes fraud upon the court, evidence tampering, and potentially criminal conspiracy. I am not a lawyer, but I am confident yours will need one. Gerald Price's face went through several colors in rapid succession, none of them healthy. The judge removed her glasses. She cleaned them. She put them back on. Mrs. Marshall, Judge Whitmore said, I am issuing a permanent restraining order, effective immediately. You are prohibited from contacting Elena Jordan, Chris Jordan, or approaching their children within 500 feet. I am also referring this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal charges, including filing false reports, fraud, and conspiracy. Mr. Price, I am referring you to the State Bar Association for investigation. Your behavior in this courtroom has been a disgrace to your profession. Gerald Price said nothing. There was nothing to say. Vivian was escorted from the courtroom by a bailiff. At the door, she stopped. She did not turn around fully, but she turned her head just enough to see Elena. Your mother, Vivian said. Her voice was barely a whisper, cracked with something that might have been regret or might have been defeat. She would have been proud of you. Elena watched Vivian disappear through the courthouse doors. She did not respond, but her eyes glistened. Chris knelt beside her wheelchair. He took her hand. You were extraordinary, he said. Elena looked at him. I learned from the best, she paused. And I mean Rachel. She has been coaching me for 3 days. From across the courtroom, Rachel gave a thumbs up. That evening, the CPS restriction was lifted. Elena walked into the NICU under her own power, Chris beside her, and for the first time in days, she held her sons. James, the bigger of the two boys, immediately grabbed her finger and did not let go. Thomas yawned, stretched, and went back to sleep, apparently unimpressed by the entire ordeal. And Grace, tiny Grace, who had survived surgery 2 days earlier and was breathing on her own for the first time, was placed gently against Elena's chest, where her tiny heartbeat synchronized with her mother's, and Elena wept with a joy so pure and overwhelming that even Michael Webb, standing guard at the door, had to turn away and clear his throat several times 6 months later. The wedding was held at a vineyard in Napa Valley on a Saturday in October, when the vines had turned gold and the afternoon light slanted across the hills like something borrowed from a painting. It was not technically a wedding. Chris and Elena were already married, but the first ceremony had been a hurried affair at a courthouse with a judge who seemed annoyed to be working on a Friday, and Michael Webb as the only witness. This ceremony was the one they deserved, the one they had earned. 50 guests, close friends, trusted colleagues, and the small number of people who had stood by them through everything. No press, no cameras, except the photographer Chris had hired. No uninvited guests. Michael Webb had seen to that personally, and given that Michael was the kind of man who could detect a photographer at 300 yards, the privacy was absolute. Elena walked down the aisle in a simple white dress. Nothing extravagant, nothing that screamed wealth or status, just a beautiful dress on a beautiful woman who had survived more in 28 years than most people face in a lifetime. She held the hands of James and Thomas, who toddled beside her, with the uncertain, determined steps of babies who had recently discovered that walking was an option and were deeply committed to the concept despite limited execution. Rachel walked behind them, carrying Grace, who was healthy, chubby, and wearing a tiny flower crown made of white roses and baby's breath. Grace had her mother's dark hair and her father's steel gray eyes, and she regarded the world with an expression of calm assessment that was so much like Chris, it made everyone who noticed it smile. Rachel leaned down and whispered to Grace, "Your mother is about to make your father cry in front of 50 people. Watch closely. This is important. Chris stood at the altar. He wore a dark suit. His hands were clasped in front of him. His jaw was set. He looked exactly like the powerful, controlled, unshakable man the world knew him to be. And then he saw Elena. The control cracked, not dramatically, not with sobs or theatrical gestures. His eyes simply filled, and 2 tears traced down his cheeks, and he did not wipe them away. He let them fall because he had learned, over the past year, that strength was not the absence of vulnerability. It was the willingness to show it to the people who mattered. Elena reached the altar. Their eyes met, and in that look was everything. The coffee in the cafe, the hospital, the courtroom, the 3 a.m. feedings and the sleepless nights. And the first time Grace laughed, and the first time the boys said something that might have been dada, and the quiet evenings when they sat together and said nothing at all because nothing needed to be said. Chris took the microphone. Years ago, he began, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She threw coffee at a woman who had it coming. Today she fills my life with warmth. I spent 6 months trying to protect her from the world, but she did not need my protection. She needed a partner, someone who would stand beside her, not in front of her. I forgot that. I will not forget again. Elena, you are my home. You have always been my home. Elena took the microphone. Her hands were steady. You told me to stay with you, she said. Today I am telling you, I am not going anywhere. Not because I need you to save me, but because every fight is better with you beside me. And because our daughter inherited your stubborn jaw, and I am going to need serious backup when she is a teenager. Laughter rippled through the guests. I love you, Elena said. All of you. This family is everything I never dared to dream I could have. They kissed. The boys clapped with uncoordinated enthusiasm. Grace reached up and grabbed Chris's nose with surprising grip strength, and he laughed. A real laugh. Open, unguarded, full. The kind of laugh that the business world would have paid good money to see, because it proved that the fearsome Chris Jordan was, underneath everything, just a man who loved his family. That evening, after the ceremony, after the dinner, after Rachel's toast, which was equal parts heartfelt and inappropriate, after Michael was caught on camera, slow dancing with the event planner, and would deny it for the rest of his life, Elena found herself alone in the guest cottage. Chris was putting the triplets to bed, a process that involved 3 separate cribs, 2 lullabies, 1 stuffed elephant that Thomas absolutely refused to sleep without, and approximately 45 minutes of negotiation with human beings who did not yet understand language but were excellent at communicating displeasure. Elena sat on the edge of the bed and opened the box of her mother's trust documents. She had been organizing them for weeks now that the trust was settled and the legal battles were over. Most of it was financial paperwork, account numbers, investment records, the dry, dense language of estate planning. But at the bottom of the box was an envelope she had not opened. It was sealed with wax, old-fashioned, the way her mother used to seal birthday cards. On the front, in Rebecca Mitchell's handwriting, were 7 words. For Ilona, open when you become a mother. Elena's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper written in the careful, elegant penmanship that Elena remembered from childhood, from grocery lists and permission slips and the notes her mother used to tuck into her lunchbox. My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, then I was right about 2 things. First, that Vivian would try to take everything from you. And second, that you would be strong enough to get it back. Elena's vision blurred with tears. She blinked them away and kept reading. But there is one more thing I need you to know. Something I should have told you when I was alive, but I was afraid. Afraid it would hurt you. Afraid it would change how you saw the world. Vivian is not your stepmother. She is your biological aunt, my sister. We were estranged for years because she could never forgive me for one thing. I married the man she loved, your father. Elena stopped breathing. She did not hate you, Elena. She hated that you existed, because you were proof that your father chose me. Every cruel word, every act of sabotage, every attempt to destroy your confidence was not about you. It was about me. It was about a wound between two sisters that never healed. I am sorry I never told you. I am sorry I left you in her care. I believed she would put aside her anger for the sake of a child. I was wrong, and that is the greatest regret of my life. But I know you, my darling girl. I know the fire in you. I know your kindness and your courage and the way you refuse to stay down no matter how many times the world pushes you. You are the best thing I ever did. I love you more than words. Mom. Elena sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. The letter rested in her lap. The vineyard was quiet outside the window. Somewhere in the next room, she could hear Chris's low voice murmuring a lullaby and the soft rustling of babies settling into sleep. The door opened. Chris walked in, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly disheveled from the bedtime wrestling match. "Everyone is down," he announced. Thomas tried to eat the elephant instead of sleeping with it, but we reached a compromise. He saw Elena's face and stopped. "Everything okay?" Elena looked at the letter. She looked at Chris. She looked out the window at the golden hills bathed in the last light of a California evening. "I think there is one more story to tell," she said. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her pocket. "But not today." She stood. She took Chris's hand. They walked outside together into the fading sunlight. From the cottage behind them came the soft, contented sounds of 3 babies sleeping. Ahead of them stretched the vineyard, the valley, the mountains, and a future that was complicated and imperfect and entirely theirs. And that is how Elena Mitchell became Elena Jordan. Not because a man saved her, but because she saved herself. She threw coffee in anger and found love in the chaos. She nearly died and chose to live. She was betrayed by the woman who raised her and still found the grace to understand why. Here is what I want to leave you with today. Your worst moment is not your last moment. The people who try to break you are usually the ones most afraid of your strength. And love, real love, does not arrive when you are ready. It arrives when you need it most. It walks in when you are at your weakest and lifts you higher than you ever believed you could stand. If this story touched your heart, please hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment telling me what you would have done if you were Elena. I read every single one. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it gets better. Because it does. It always does. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and never stop fighting for the life you deserve. Closing disclaimer. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful storytelling with real emotional value. Every character, every twist, and every lesson was crafted with one purpose: to remind you that no matter how dark things get, strength, love, and courage will always find a way through. Thank you for listening, and we will see you in the next story.